That is, I love it. Like, just, I didn't know what to say, so I said, well, but God just showing up and getting words, I love it. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, this kind of dropped on the plane for me while I was on the plane. I was sitting next to Gio, and he had his little spoon, and it just sparked this message in my heart. And so I want to speak to you, to all those here. I want to speak around the topic, a well-placed stone. A well-placed stone, and I'm going to take us to Ephesians 6 for a second. This is like the real thought behind it, I guess, but I'm going to utilize the story of David and Goliath to pull some things from it, and it's going to be just a leadership message, just a thought for our staff, for our leaders, and a little bit of a thought for your personal life too. I think you definitely cannot abstract the fact that your personal life and your personal well-being is really going to be the tone and set the tone for your leadership and for your function in everything you do. Just a thought for us there. So Ephesians 6, I'm just going to go over there in my phone. And it simply says this: finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And this is the part we're going to zero in on. For your struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. I want to speak this because I think that one of the realities of ministry and the realities of life and the realities of marriage and leadership is that you just can't account for a perfect run. And I think I've watched so many people over the seasons in so many settings, right? Like whether you play sport or you start a business or you go to cook something. Even if you're trying to cook something, stop playing footsies with me, okay? Sorry. It's like I just want to be seen as a person sometimes. I just want to be seen as a human. And so it doesn't matter what goes on. I find that there's a lot of people that say things like, oh, well, yeah, I would have shot an amazing round of golf if this wasn't happening. I would have cooked a great meal if this didn't happen. And I would have had a great year if this didn't happen. And the one constant that you can definitely plan for is challenge. Yeah. And so, ministry is something that will come for you. People are people, and you cannot abstract that. Shannon said a very funny joke today. I wrote it down in my diary. Shannon said a very funny joke. Wow. And she was talking about AI. And she was like, what do we do with artificial intelligence? So, well, tell us the joke. What's the quote? Come on, Shannon. No one's going to laugh.
So why are we spending all this time trying to fix artificial intelligence when we haven't done anything about national stupidity?
Oh, Shannon. Said it straight from the business manager's mouth. And the reality is, though, it's true, right? Like, people, we do stupid things. We get into funks. We get into modes. We hurt people. We just do things. And ministry is this thing that you cannot abstract that fact from. And life is that thing. You can't hope for a perfect boss or a perfect team or any of those things. And so I think what I love about Ephesians 6 in this is that it's kind of taking our focus away from the fight that is maybe the most obvious fight that you might jump to, and it's putting us behind the scenes of the fight that is actually needing to be fought. And I think one of the major things that will increase any leadership environment, any leader, any entrepreneur, is simply this: do you really know the fight that matters? Because on any given day, in any given conversation, in any given season, there is more than one fight calling for your attention. And it's the fight that is the one that actually matters, that is the one that a leader is paid for, is worth their salt, if they know how to identify it. You're not a leader simply because you're a CEO. You're a leader because you've given yourself that understanding and that title. And leaders rise to the top because everything falls on leaders. And I think there's something about you having that mentality. So in this year, as you maybe fight to reconcile the year, what's the fight behind the fight? Like, what's the fight that matters as you reconcile the year? As you got problems, and you're starting and you're leading something, short on resource, short on people, short on time. What's the fight behind the fight? When you go home and there's a million things calling for your attention, what's the fight behind the fight? And I think most leaders spend their time fighting things that won't change a thing. And we've been having a conversation amongst the execs, and we've been talking about, okay, from a leadership mentality, what is the one piece of work that if you did would solve more problems than all the other work that you're doing? Yeah. There's a false kind of narrative out there that you've got to do everything on your task list at the exact same time. When the reality is what you've got to do is the one thing that changes everything. There's one thing that will always move the ball down the field. There's one thing that will break the chains. There's one thing that will bring more people in. There's one thing that will bring resource in. How good are you at knowing the fight behind the fight? Here's another little layer before we jump into the points. And it's simply this. I would say more people today in a leadership world, in a personal world, don't do this well. And one of the greatest fights that is happening at the moment is the fight for your mental space. The fight for your peace, the fight for your joy, the fight for your purpose, the fight to feel like what you've been living is meaningful. That fight, there is something greater behind it. And if you don't know how to place your stone where it needs to be, then the truth is that the giant that needs to be toppled, it won't be the giant that's even addressed. And so the well-placed fight comes from this thought that, and why am I talking about it from a David perspective? Well, I'm talking about it because as I look at the story of David and Goliath and we read it, I actually started reading it through just very human terms and a human lens. And what I found was that there was actually like maybe 5 or 6 other fights that I would have engaged with before I even got to Goliath. Like I would have lost my mind at my brother saying, "Why are you here?" I would have. But how many of you don't engage in the fight of ministry that you're meant to because you're fighting with someone within your family? The family fight is quite often one of the fights that isn't the fight that you're meant to be fighting. There's quite often a fight with the people that know you best. What does that moment represent for David? It basically represents that the people that know you best are often the people that see you with the least of what God wants to do with you. And so do you fight them? Do you fight the haters? Everyone puts so much energy into the haters on Instagram or on TikTok or in their mind. But why do they matter? The reality is the best way to silence a hater is with success. So what's the fight that really matters? And David walks past so many fights in this moment that I just think is quite brilliant. Like if we go over to the first one, it says this in verse 28. When Eliab, David's older brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned. Isn't it funny how sometimes you showing up for your best day makes other people burn? Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep?" David right there, how many of us get caught up on a small, cutting, snide comment and it runs through your mind over and over and over and over again? I know people that literally have lost sleep because of a snide email, a snarky response, a subtle, passive-aggressive relationship in their life. And David is literally having fight after fight after fight presented to him. And yet David is so zeroed in on the injustice on the battlefield that he actually bypasses this. What, if you don't know, which you all probably would know, is what's happening in this construct as well is Goliath is doing something that in the ancient Near East was a custom, was that instead of getting the whole armies to go to war quite often, obviously they would just choose a champion, and Goliath was their champion, and Goliath is representative of something far greater. The Israelites were, by this point, worn down. They had no food. They were struggling to just even stay on the battlefield because doing nothing will eventually take a toll. So while you're getting caught up, the lesson here is while you're getting caught up on the fights that you're engaging in, you're missing the fight, and that fight is wearing you down because doing nothing is a problem. And so David in this moment, like he understands, wait, there's a bigger fight here, and his eyes are drawn to it. But I don't think that these arguments was God going, man, how do we really build the drama up here? I don't think these arguments and things are God going, well, we've got to fill this story with something. I mean, we know main stage, but like, what do we do to make this a little bit more? No, like, I think this is the devil. I think the devil is trying to pick apart David He's starting to try and get into David's head, and if he can get into your head, he'll get into your soul.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Can I ask you, like, as leaders and
Very good.
budding leaders and people that want to just fulfill what God's got in your life, if you're not careful with what's swirling in your head,
That's very true.
it'll plant itself in your soul.
Yeah.
That's good.
That thing that's swirling around, that question, that thing that you keep ruminating on, which ruminating is what cows do. They vomit and then chew on their vomit and then bring it down. How many of us, instead of eating out of good thoughts, out of new thoughts, out of innovative thoughts, creative thoughts that are actually going to take what you do forward, are mulling over problems or mulling over whatever, regurgitating the very same thing and digesting it. And then you wonder why you're deflated, why you're defeated, why you're depressed, why you're frustrated. There is as much of a fight to stay focused as there is to just enjoy and I think entertain what the devil's putting in your mind. Most of our lack of productivity is not that we don't have potential, it's that we waste it.
Yeah.
Period.
And so David right here has his own brother say, why are you here leaving those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked you are. Your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. One of the first mistakes that a leader will make is lead according to somebody's opinion of them, not according to what they're meant to do. I've made that mistake so many times. There's rumors flying around, there's haters, there's people, there's disgruntled. Sometimes it's as simple as I came from this leader, this is how they acted, I don't want to be seen as that, so let me just make sure I'm not that. I sit in front of so many people on team, and I'm like, why are you trying to not be your father so hard that you are the absolute opposite of it, and completely not even yourself anymore?
Yeah.
Man, I've had so many people be tired. Okay, so now you're not pushing people? Man, I know so many Christians that over-preach at work, so now you don't preach at work? You see right here, David's first fight is the fight of the people's opinions that are closest to him, and he walks straight past it. If you're going to walk to the battlefield that God's got for you, you've got to walk through popular opinion.
Wow.
And a leader that can walk past the fight of popular opinion is a leader that will actually place a well-placed stone. David had one stone, one target. He didn't waste it. He didn't fight so hard before he got to the battlefield that once he was on the battlefield, he had nothing left. The next one we see is down in verse 29. David says, "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. So he's basically asking, what's the reward here? But you see again, David has an opportunity. He's frustrated. He goes, can't I even speak? But then he moves on. I think there's no problem with the response. There's a problem in him staying there.
Yeah.
As you reflect this year and as you think around this time and as this message hits, I just hope that as a leader, you might ask yourself, am I stuck in what I should have brushed off?
That's very good.
That's very good.
Because if you're really going to take everything that everybody says to heart, your heart's going to be pretty cut up.
That's real.
I'm sure David, this was not the first time he fought with his brothers, but yet David had it down to an art that he was going to move on. So then if you jump down a little bit further, at 33, Saul replied, "You are not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." Statement is full of things. First of all, one, it's the person that's going to send you is the first person that doubted you. In that moment, the one that was going to send him out to battle is the first one that doubted him. I think too often we make the mistake of fighting for approval from the person that's above us instead of walking onto the battlefield with confidence. And what I mean by that is this. It's not talking about the difference between being sent and went. What it's talking about is this. I've watched too many people not show up to their fight because they don't know that their mentor or their leader is over there cheering them on at an nth degree. At the end of the day, you're not fighting for approval. You're fighting an enemy.
Yeah.
And if what you're fighting for is approval, you'll miss the enemy. What's the enemy in your leadership right now? What's the real problem behind your major problem? What's the problem in your home? Is the problem your budget? Is the problem your family? Is the problem your what is it? Is the problem alone? You don't like being alone? What's the actual problem? And if you don't actually address the problem behind the problem, what you'll do is you'll live in a cycle. Now, I think what the devil's great at is getting you into fights that won't change a thing. In fact, the devil is a master at getting you into fights that only change you for the worse. So ask yourself that. Is this fight glorifying God? Is this fight moving the vision? Is this fight bringing me joy? Is this fight going to change anything? Is this fight against an enemy, or is this fight against someone that God's calling me to be a brother and a sister? How many Christians are fighting against Christians when we're supposed to reconcile?
Yeah.
I don't care what you attach to another Christian. This verse in Ephesians is very clear. If I never understand this, when people have a fight against another Christian, but then they say, oh, well, this Christian has this spirit, or this Christian has this agenda. Okay, cool. But then who are you fighting?
Yeah. Right.
Because you don't hate the Christian because there's a spirit at work in them.
Exactly.
That'd be like a doctor hating a patient because they're sick.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. The truth is, what you're really fighting is someone hurt you and you're angry at them and you're throwing whatever you got to throw. But the truth is, what we got to understand is when you can do this as a leader, you start leading people effectively, because people stop hurting you when you know that the people are not hurting you. The people are doing it because they're hurt by something afflicting them. Whether it's their past, whether it's their present, whether it's whatever it is, all of a sudden you become a light leader. And if you're not a light leader, you'll start silencing, you'll start siloing, you'll become distant, you'll stop trusting people, you'll become suspicious. And honestly, it just creates a really horrible dynamic if you start treating the people in front of you like the people that went before you.
Right.
Saul replied, he didn't get his reply that he wanted, but then he says this: you're only young, so you're underqualified. I think too many people fight the fight of qualification instead of fighting the giant on the field.
Yeah.
I've watched so many people go and basically try qualify themselves and feel qualified before they get to doing the work that God's calling them to. And the truth is this: you're never going to be qualified for what God's got for you. Now, I'm not saying this is a call not to study, it's not a call not to upskill, it's none of that. But if what your trust will be is in your skill set, you're going to miss it. And in fact, further down, David says basically that God's going to honor me in this. This is my paraphrase. He says, God's going to honor me in this because he will teach you that he doesn't save neither by sword or by spear. So David gives us a clue that my weapon of choice is a weapon that glorifies God, because God doesn't move the way you think he moves. So for you, you might think you need sword and spear, and God wants you to move in an unorthodox manner.
Yeah.
So as a leader, instead of doing what you think you need, how about doing what you should do with what God places in your hands? Which is a great perspective, because it takes away the fact that you've got to wait for something, you have what you need. You don't need to get better, you just got to get more faithful. You don't actually have to bridge the gap with more knowledge, you've got to bridge it with more faith. And so yes, you upskill, yes, you do that, but I just think personally, if all you're going to do is continue to fight the fight of feeling qualified, you're never going to get to the giant. You're never going to feel like you're a good enough speaker. None of that's ever going to move. And then if you jump down to verse 38, then Saul addressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and bronze and a helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that leaders often do is the fight to fit in. You know, I think quite often in the idea of just trying to fit into culture or fit into what people want of you. You know, recently I would say that I had the revelation that in times of trial in leadership, people's opinions start flying over the table thick and fast. And it's good and it's okay. That's what teams do, right? Teams talk, teams say things, and you want that. You got to welcome it. But as a leader, what it can often do is it can start putting you in a place where you question you. You don't know your place in a way. Because people are always going to speak from their gift, right? Like if Maddie's gifted in the creative, she's going to see the solution from creativity. If Jake is a great teacher, he's going to see the solution from teaching. If Audrey's practical, she's going to see the solution from practicalities, right? And in seasons and quite often, culture's always going to preach a solution, right? Like culture's going to tell you what the church needs. The greater church is going to kind of come up with what it needs. But the truth is this: David had a select battlefield with a select solution. And every leader has to know that there's not a collective solution, there's a specific solution for the battlefield that God's called you to. And what I mean by all of this, and what my lesson has been, is that as a leader, instead of fitting into everybody else's solution, I need to go before God. I need to do Psalm 144. God, come down, touch the mountains so that they smoke. Basically, God, what I need from you, he's referencing Mount Sinai. What I need from you is a personal encounter like you gave Moses.
Come on.
What I need from you is the same way that Moses came down with the 10 Commandments. God, I need my things. Like, what do you need me to move on? What do you need me to do? I need your presence. I need the tent of meeting, and you put me in this seat as leader. God, what do you want from me? And the greatest thing you've got to understand is that you as a leader have to make room for the gifts, because the gifts are part of the battle strategy, but you also have to know that your job is not to fit into everybody else's gift. Your job as leader is to break the ground that makes way for everybody's gift. And so if you're leading something, if you've been asked to lead a project, if you've been asked to lead a ministry, if you've been asked to lead a task, the worst thing you could do is try lead it like somebody else would have led it. If you want to know what it looks like to walk in somebody else's tunic, in Saul's bronze, in Saul's armor, basically do this. Every time you're leading, if you're thinking about how someone else would lead it, you're leading it outside of your strength. As a leader, you've got to be able to say, if this is the sphere that I've been given, then it would be safe for me to do it as I was made to do it. You're not stepping outside of authority. You're not stepping out of your sphere of influence. If God has released you to it, do it as you would do it. That doesn't mean you're not open to correction. Doesn't mean you're not open to learning. Doesn't mean you don't utilize and bring other gifts in there. But as leader, you carve out the direction. You say what's next. And what I think David did so well on this is instead of stepping onto the battlefield as Saul, he stepped onto the battlefield as David. He even referenced the things that prepped him for it, not the things that he was lacking for it. If God saved me from the paw of the lion and he saved me from the paw of the bear, so God will save me from the hands of this Philistine. He had trust in what God was developing in him, not the fact that he didn't fit the armor that was given to him. Whenever I've stepped into leadership, it is natural that you will step in with people that will give you expectations of how they want you to step on that field. Every leader, every time you step amongst followers, every time, I've taken over campuses, I've taken over teams, and the first thing you'll get is always this. A group of people come up to you in every single scenario I've ever been in. You'll have this group and they'll come up to you and they're like, hey, I just want to have time. So the previous leader, they weren't really good listeners. And I'm just really hoping that you'll be a great listener. Yeah, that's awesome. I do think I should be a good listener. That's good. The last leader just didn't really love deep teaching. I really hope you love deep teaching. Hey, the last leader, just not enough vision. I really hope you're a good vision person. Hey, the last leader wasn't really relational. And I really hope you're super relational. Hey, the last leader of creative, Maddie, I really need you to be. Hey, the last college leader, Courtney. Hey, Brianna Ford, the last person that took on this team. Hey, that's cool and all merited. You'd be silly not to listen. But there's a difference between listening and wearing someone else's expectations.
Great. That's very good.
David still had some sort of ability, incredible innate ability, to realize Saul's given me armor, but Goliath is still Goliath. He hasn't missed that Goliath has to be beaten, but he's also not lost it that he has to be beaten as Saul would beat him. If Saul was the one that needed to be on the battlefield, Saul should have stepped on there with his own armor. But David understood what he was made for. Can I encourage you that a well-placed stone in leadership is knowing what your strength is, what your gift is, and what your sphere of influence is, and what you've been tasked with, and now let God move on that, in that. The worst thing you can do as a leader is try to be another leader. I think one of the greatest parts of that is that whole verse for me is that. And then down to verse 43, he said to David, "Am I a dog that you come out to me with sticks?" This is Goliath. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said. I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." I'm going to split this one in two. First, he said to David, "Am I a dog that you came at me with sticks?" First of all, just stepping out to the battlefield and feeling the attack and the verbal attack on self-worth. As a leader, I think I was talking to someone in the foyer and I was saying the most vulnerable thing I think any human can do is speak. When you preach, when you speak a dream, when you speak in front of people, when you speak at a leadership meeting, it is to me the equivalent of like, and Ords once told me this, it's like when you do something creative, like paint a picture, sing a song, but worse. Because it's like painting a picture, but it comes from your soul. It's like speaking, but it challenges your intellect, your leadership, your ideas. Did they understand? Did they interpret? It is the most vulnerable thing. When you get down from speaking, you feel like even if you spoke up in a meeting, if you prayed us into, like I'm sure that even maybe not Ming because she's like Queen Ming, but maybe Ming off the back of praying could replay that. Oh gosh, what was that like? And the enemy, the minute you step on the field, let's just note this. Before he threw a spear, before he even raised a hand, he used his voice. It has been my experience that the last fight you've got to get through is the minute you step on the battlefield, the devil will start to hurl insult after insult at you, telling you that you are not enough, that you are almost an insult. That it is an insult for you to even consider being the business manager, Shannon, of a church. It is an insult that Michaela Mulder might even consider stepping out onto the battlefield of ministry. It is an insult, Adam, that you might, or Katori, that you're going to retry and lead again. That's what he said. I think for his starting of why he did People College, like I think go again, leaders go again. I thought it was, and it was like brilliant. The first thing you're going to understand is that the devil is going to try rock your confidence and he is going to invade your headspace. He will basically hurl out insults that will try and make you, basically throw you off your game. But the last thing he says is he follows it up with threats. So the devil's really good at doing this. He will threaten you, and then he will basically he will insult you, and then he'll threaten you and keep pointing your eyesight towards the collateral that comes with loss. I've seen more leaders quit in the last kind of 10% of the whole thing, of the journey, of the race, of the battlefield, than anywhere else. David's overcome so many fights, and the last one I think is the most difficult. This is what losing would look like to you. It's going to cost you your life. And I have felt, and I've watched, that most leaders will quit because they think that their livelihood is at risk. And let's not call it livelihood. Let's call it life as you know it ends here. You'll never be able to go back to your family. What will they say when you quit? What will you do? How will you pay your bills? What's going to happen? The devil's greatest tactic is this is where it ends. This is where it ends. I want you to know, trying to take me down comes with a massive, massive repercussion. Will your kids still love me? Will your kids still love God when this is all done? Like, are you sure you're going to have a marriage? Are you sure you're going to have confidence? Will you still love Jesus? Will you be passionate? Man, how embarrassing will it be if you lose? He will basically try and make sure you're aware of the collateral. Right. Yeah. And David does not engage in that fight. The Bible says that you should take every thought captive that exalts itself against the knowledge of Christ Jesus before it becomes basically a high thing. Yeah. Note that arguments don't usually start at 20. They start at 0.5. And then you retort. And then it gets a bit it escalates a bit more, and then you retort, and it escalates, and you retort, and you escalate. That's what the Bible's saying by that verse becomes a high thing. The devil says something that you could have ignored, and it stay here, but you respond. No, well, I am qualified. Where are your qualifications? Just keeps going. And I think what is happening in this moment is David has an ability to not fight that fight. He arrests the thought and aims straight at the voice piece, at the mouthpiece of the fight, which is where I want to lead us to. My hope is that you would learn through discernment, through wisdom, and through wise counsel, what is the actual fight in your season? Because I just feel like, I've sat across from a lot of you this year, and like I do any other year, and I've watched so many of you, I think one of and this is not a statement of superiority, it's a statement that is a luxury from being in the coach's seat, right? Like the coach can see what you're doing. Like the coach is like, hey, you're picking your head up too soon, or hey, like they're triple teaming, like, the coach can see things. And as your coach and pastor, I've watched at a distance, and I've had meetings with Eva. And it's ironic because some of Eva's, this year was a lot of Eva having to sift through some fights. There was a whole bunch of fights that Eva had to look through. And all of a sudden, she went through our annual report and we exceeded our thresholds that we had set a year ago. And our thresholds were set because we were 20% under margin. And then we went, in some cases, 20% over the threshold. So like crazy wins. But most of the time, Eva felt like she was losing. And I've sat across from people that are ready to quit because they don't feel sufficient, or they don't feel like qualified, or they feel tired. And they think that, how many people stop doing ministry because they go, ministry's tiring me? And I don't think ministry's tiring you. It's actually the fact that you have put this thing where you have to win in ministry. And the fact that you're not winning like you want to win is what's tiring you, not the work. The work's not affecting you. The fact that you're not winning like you want to win is affecting you. And so there's these things where I feel like so many of us are swinging stones at things that aren't going to change anything. And as you wrap up the year, and this part of the year gets reflective for everybody, I really just hope that when you reflect, you get some discernment. So what are we going to do out of this? Number one, pointed things. Spiritual things bring spiritual rewards. I want you to pray for discernment. God, give me wisdom. It says that the Bible says that you do not spare on that. That if you ask for wisdom, God will give you wisdom. God, give me wisdom and give me discernment. I need to see the fight that I actually should be aiming at. Because a well-placed stone saves a whole bunch of casualties. Can we note that from this thing? Like, David's well-placed stone saved a lot of Israelite lives. A well-placed stone as well saved him a whole lot of effort. He conserved energy, he conserved thought, he conserved argument, he conserved even, finite energy because he didn't engage in things that he didn't have to engage in. As a leader, you might have 10 problems, but there's one giant standing behind all of them. If you go trying to knock out every 10 problems, you're going to end up at the end of the year so tired. What is the problem that is causing the 10 problems? You need wisdom and discernment for that. And how do you do that? You ask God. And don't just ask God flippantly. God loves a wholehearted prayer. When Elisha prayed for rain, he got into the position of like birthing a child. Like he hunkered down and he prayed. Do you pray with your heart and soul? Do you actually sit there and don't throw away prayers, just actually pray, God, I need wisdom and discernment. Okay? As you get wisdom and discernment, things start to shift. Second thing is actually start asking God, what is it that you want to place in my hands to topple this giant? He didn't fight Goliath the same way he fought the lion and the bear. It said that he struck the lion and the bear. But he actually went out and he picked 5 smooth stones for Goliath. There's a different strategy for every giant. Make sure that you're asking God, what do I need? Third, the Bible says that plans fail through lack of wise counsel. The Bible talks to us about we're a body connected. There's huge references everywhere that we do not do this alone. So, when you go out into this battlefield, like, who's speaking with you? Who have you spoken to? Hey, I think I'm tired because of this. I think my greatest giant is this. I think the greatest problem is this. What are your thoughts? I think having people in there that know you is just crucial. I remember there was a time where I was just so tired of things, and I spoke to my best friend, and I just spoke to him about what I was angry at. And I was so convinced that I was aiming at the right giant. And my friend, knowing me, said, Chris, this is how you get A. B, I think you're missing this. And when I took those words, I actually realized that there was a giant that I was missing, because I got distracted with the fight in front of me, not the fight that I needed to get to. So that's my thought. Obviously, it depends a lot on your ability to view this, but, find and apply this to your life. But I just think too many people fight the fight that doesn't matter. And so don't get caught up in little arguments. Don't get caught up in people's opinions of you. Don't get caught up in the fact that you need to be someone else. Don't get caught up in abuse. Don't get caught up in feeling inadequate. Don't get caught up in the consequence. Don't get caught up in the collateral of loss. Keep focused on what God has called you to bring down.
Come on.
So good.
That's my staffy. We've got 10 minutes left. Let's use 5 of them for questions and finish 5 minutes early. If there's any questions at all or thoughts, happy to answer. Or, hey, again, as always, we've got great minds here, great pastors online and here. You've got Pastor Lauren Clampett online. You got lots of people there. Pastors in the room you can ask. Any questions, thoughts on how somebody else does, identifies the giant and moves through them?
I have a question. It may be similar, but how, I think you've spoke on this before, Pastor Chris, but how do you engage, let's say, our exec team or the people that you lead in terms of identifying giants of the church or giants that everyone, I guess, has a role to play in facing?
So how do I address the execs in that way, or how do I find the giant?
Yeah, how do you engage and gather their point of view and their perspective?
Yes.
On what the giants might be.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm going to give you an answer that I don't think is quite common, and it is this: as a leader, you need to be big enough, secure enough to create an environment where all types of feedback is welcomed. I think this year we actually had a really interesting meeting once. We had Jonathan Sanchez, part of our our team. Our creative team. He's based in Mexico. He was here visiting, grabbing culture. We were talking about future plans with him and Blanca. And it was just this incredible, great time. But it was also one of our most vulnerable times as a team and as a church. We were right in the midst of what was a really just hotbed of, people just mudslinging and all sorts of kind of stuff. We were off the back of running so hard trying to get church off the, back and running off the back of pandemic. And then you get this challenge on top of you. So everyone was kind of pretty worn and tired. And I remember we get into an exec meeting, and if you wanted Jonathan to get a real understanding of who we were, he got an understanding. It was the straw that broke the camel's back hit that day, and execs they poured out. They just said everything. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, all right, this is good. We've got this guy here that he's just seeing our culture and learning stuff, and you guys are falling apart right now, and you're saying some things, and I'm like, okay, all right. And right there in that moment is an example that they need to feel free to do that. Obviously, this is the room for it, right? They've got to be able to kind of unload and unleash up. They've got to be able to ask their concerns up, not down. And I, in that moment, have to go, okay, one, I want this. Because if I don't allow, and one of the things for 2 years or so, I was like, I need your raw thoughts. I need your raw thoughts. I need your raw thoughts. Stop giving me calculated. Stop giving me formulated. Stop giving me polished. I need raw. And we've worked hard to get there, and we've got more to get to still. But my goal is that if they can speak freely in that moment, then what I do is it allows me to be able to kind of go, okay, I know the breadth of it, and now we can assess together. And I think inviting honest conversation like that is what allows us to really find the problem. And so that's one example of it, but it's happened multiple times, especially since the craziness of pandemic and trying to lead a church through that. We've had many an honest conversation. And I think it's always been really, really fruitful, because there was, in the emotion of that day and in their tiredness, there was wisdom and there was truth. And then there was also, I don't think that's the fight. Like, I think the fight is that we're tired in this particular vein of what you said, but there's more there and there's this, that. And so I feel like I was talking to Mark Hopkins, one of our overseers, and he was just praising Craig Rochelle. And he said one of the things that Craig Rochelle has done is allowed so much honesty that he says in one of his books, I think he said, or something like that, that one of his staff and him, he almost fired him for what he said, because the guy overstepped some things, didn't fire him. It was actually like, my point is, he created an environment that was honest enough where a bit of just overstepping a line was permissible and invited, so that they could better shape the environment. And so I think that my thing as a leader is, I grew up in a thing where it was like, this is a boundary you don't even come close to, because to ask certain questions would be seen as disrespect. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that we never got to really flesh out real problems. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that we're trying to continue to build is, let's keep things as honest as possible, because the thing is, we always say this, the you that stays at home doesn't grow. Right. So if they hold back, I might not see a part of me that I need to see. If they hold back, I might not see a part of them that I need to see. And so if we can continue to create an environment where there is no hold back, and obviously no one's swearing at each other or being abusive or horrible or hurling insults, but we are talking about some really like honest things. Like, they said some things and I was like, okay, all right, this really, I mean, you're asking us to think through everything with what you're saying, you know? And it makes you feel vulnerable as a leader. It makes you feel a lot of things. You've got to sift and you've got to shoulder that as a leader. That's why you're there. You've got to have big enough shoulders, and you've got to have value systems that are not placed in people's opinions, like we spoke through here today, so that you can hear your team say things that you would in other settings and seasons take personal and go, it's not personal. We're all here to win. I know that Gio wants to win. I know that Shannon wants to win. I know that Eva wants to win. I know that Jimmy wanted to win. I know that it was all about the bigger collective win of church. And so I think more than anything, it's creating an environment where true honesty can breed. And I think, you know, that day, I think it was very, very honest. And I think it led to great conversations. And more than anything, it showed we can have big conversations, even if there's a guest, so to speak. Because Jonathan was part of team, but it was his first time in-house. And so he basically saw a real family moment. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you invite someone to family dinner and the kids are being horrible and you just yell at them and there's a whole thing and everyone's like, and then you're like, coffee, tea? You know? It was like basically that. It's like, hey, come and see how we do things. And it's like, and it's like, coffee, tea, lunch, should we go get something? You know? And so I think that is the key to sifting through things. And then last one I'll just say is know your numbers. Mm-hmm. Numbers tell a story. And, you know, I think we are where we are because Eva and Sabrina brought a really good annual report that exposed a lot of things, and we saw a theme, and we're like, okay, those numbers are telling a story. And when you know your numbers, basically assess, you can prioritize, and then you can get to executing. So that's my thoughts on it.
No problem. Thank you.
I've got a question. You were talking on point number 1 about God giving wisdom and discernment. And you talked about not having a throwaway prayer. And one of the things of this past year that I've really been focusing on is developing a prayer life, developing a prayer rhythm. And a lot of what I've been doing with that is a lot of sitting and reflecting and listening. But I haven't often found myself at a place where I'm doing this powerful, God give me the answer type of prayer. So I'm just wondering if you could teach me what that looks like in your prayer life, as far as what does the rhythm look like? What is the ebb and flow over the days, weeks, months? Like, is that something that you're going to every single day? Is that something that you're assessing things over time and you're like, okay, God, this is something we need now? Because I'm just trying to figure out, like, in this intimacy that we have with God, what is the appropriate way to approach Him? And this is what I've found so far, but I'm curious to know what that looks like for you.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's the best way I could tell it is like this. I don't think heartfelt prayer is when we're, in rooms shouting down the heavens. Like, that's not the prototypical heartfelt prayer. It's not that's not a heartfelt prayer. I'm just saying it's not the prototypical heartfelt prayer. I think the best way I could say it is, when someone gives you a heartfelt response. When you say to someone, what do you love? And they go, oh, I love this, versus, okay, so glad you asked. What I really love? So that's kind of a bit jovial, but excited, but it's heartfelt, through to, a heartfelt apology, and a throwaway apology. Yeah. A heartfelt conceding in an argument, and a heartfelt, and a one that didn't. Yeah. When you're in an argument or a leadership moment or a conversation with your husband and wife, and there's a heartfelt, I get what you're saying and I agree, versus, fine, I agree. And I think there's also, lastly to that, I think there's a heartfelt, Dad, I want this from my kids, and I want something. Like, for example, one of my kids yesterday was, they're just, what'd they say? They were like, one of them for Christmas wants an electric guitar. I know they don't want an electric guitar. They don't heartfelt want an electric guitar. It's a cool thing to do. It's like, I don't know, that's all it is. But there's other moments where I see their little face light up, and they don't even say much, and they don't beg me, but they're like, oh, that's so cool. That's heartfelt. And what's the process to heartfelt? And so that's what heartfelt looks like. What's the process towards it? And why does it sometimes look like a wrestle to get those prayers out? Well, I think it's because God needs us sometimes to arrive at an understanding of what that prayer answered really does for us, what it really moves in the kingdom, and for us to really meditate on it enough that we genuinely want it.
Yeah, that's good.
So sometimes the wrestle for the building, I've prayed many a prayer for the building. I want the building. I mean, buildings are cool. They're great. Versus, God, the way I can serve your people, I can see people moving. Man, I get why we need a building now. That sentence is a prayer. Yeah. And God goes, because how often in the Bible does it say, your prayers or your cries have reached my throne room. They have reached the heavens. I think that there is something about us arriving at the full understanding of why we need what we need, that God goes, I'll move on that prayer, because you actually know what you're asking for, or you feel what you're asking for, versus like, yeah, I'll take $1 million. It's like, you don't really want $1 million. You're just throwing things out like I'm a genie. That's what heartfelt has been. Now, I can't say that that's the biggest biblical model. I mean, I've got Bible verses I can pull for that. But every time I've done that, my whispers do more than my shouts.
Yes.
I saw a hand raised, and then we can finish. It was Jazzy, I believe. Or she said bye, one of the two. I'm not sure. She's like,
So while you were speaking, I was really thinking about the perspective of like the brothers. Like David, he like, his brothers were kind of like belittling him in a way, and that's like a tactic of the enemy. So in the standpoint of leadership, how do you check yourself in leadership when you see someone's on a rise, like that the Lord's using them, or that they are just like coming up? How do you keep like a humble heart? How do you keep the same goal in mind? How do you just like regulate competition even in situations like that from a leadership standpoint?
Yeah. I think for me, this has always been rooted in God's sovereignty. I have been promoted. I say this a lot. I have been promoted and demoted multiple times. And I never I never blamed my leader. I always ask myself the question, God, if this is happening, what do I need to learn? Because everything passes through God. And God ultimately is the one that promotes. The Bible tells us that. And so what I think I always ask is, okay, God, I let the competition exist in the sense, and I let the desire exist because that's healthy. I need to want more.
Yeah.
But it's when I start thinking I deserve more, where I go, that's where it gets, that's where you're wrong.
Yeah.
The minute we go, I deserve more, I should be there, that, right there, that's where you're wrong. The desire for more is not wrong. The thinking you deserve it is wrong. Because if you deserved it and you were ready for it, he would have promoted you for it. And sometimes he wants to promote you above the very station you were going for. Sometimes you're not ready for the station you're going for. There's multitude and a multiplicity of outcomes to that. But the greatest thing you've got to understand is every moment you're not where you want to be, you've got to ask God, where does my heart need to shift to get me there?
That's good.
What do you still have to do in me, God? And I think that is a safe place to be. Want it, but don't think you deserve it.
Thank you.
Lastly, I'll just say, don't be discouraged that you don't have it. That you don't have it doesn't mean you're not made for it. It just might mean that he's still shaping you for it.
Yeah.
So don't completely let go, and don't let it be a discouragement, but let it be a, God, okay, take me through it. How do I get there?
Yeah.
That's my last thing. All right, guys, staffy, there it is. I'm going to go eat. I'm thankful because Ord's brought sandwiches from home. And yes, we're in the West Loop and there's great restaurants. I don't want any of them. I want a homemade sandwich.